Mr. Sassafras.
Thanks very much, and thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it. I wasn't expecting anybody to come out except my crew over here. This is a simple story. It's a simple story. I took my boat from Lunenburg to Bermuda, and halfway across on the edge of the Gulf Stream, I had to turn it around and take it back to Bermuda.
To Lunenburg, yeah.
Okay, did everyone hear the simple story part? Okay, simple story. Sailed my boat to Bermuda, didn't make it, took it back to Lunenburg. Came home, tail between my legs. But very happy that I was on the ground. This is one of those stories, like, pilots have a line, right? It's better to be standing on the ground wishing you were flying than flying wishing you were on the ground. And this is one of those stories. Anyways, I came home, and Rob Wilkinson, the Commodore of the club, or former Commodore of the club, we sat down, and he'd heard the story, and he asked me to give a talk on it, because he said this is not a simple story. There's a lot of stuff going on in this 800 miles that we sail. And he asked me to talk about the seamanship and the decision process and what happened in those 800 miles. And I need to preface this. I gave a talk last year. I'm not sure how many of you attended it. But last year I crossed the Gulf Stream alone and lost my forestay in a fairly temperamental storm, and had a real struggle to get back to Lunenburg without a forestay on the Swan, and in very stormy conditions. And so basically, when Rob said, talk about the seamanship, the reality is I sailed across the Gulf Stream 4.5 times, and in those 4.5 times, 4 boats have sunk around me. The first time was Newport, Bermuda in 2024. Some of the guys here were on that boat. In that race, very lumpy water in the Gulf Stream, 2 boats sank. On the trip back, the one where I lost my forestay, I was in a storm. There was another boat returning from Bermuda, a 56-foot plank boat, 100 miles away from me, same storm. It sank. So that's 3 boats. And the story I'm about to tell you, I turned around, another boat didn't. Hullabaloo, 41-foot dealer, decided to keep going. It sank. The guys were rescued from their lifeboat by a freighter that was on its way to Croatia. So they got a trip to Croatia. So my point to Rob is, well, I'm not sure I'm the guy who wants to talk about seamanship, because basically, if you're going to go across the Gulf Stream, you should call me and find out where I'm going, and don't go on my own.
It might be you.
It just might be me, yeah, but anyways, so this is, Rob asked me to speak tonight, and you have to bear with me. I'm going to tell you the story, and at the same time, I'm going to talk about some of the issues and the seamanship, the safety at sea issues that come up when you're sailing in very real conditions. So this is Rob that asked me. So I'm going to start at the beginning. When I spoke last year, I had just come off the water, I just returned from the Heineken Regatta. I had actually, after losing my forestay and sailing to Lunenburg, I returned the boat not last fall, 2 falls ago, to Bermuda and then to the Caribbean, and I raced Sassafras in the Caribbean 600 and the Heineken Regatta, and so that is Sassafras in the Heineken Regatta with our beautiful spinnaker made by Ken Piper, and then at the end of the Heineken Regatta, I parked the boat in St. Martin and then left, and then returned to the boat in early June and sailed the boat from St. Martin to Bermuda, where, you know, we stayed for about 4 days. And while we were staying there, I didn't realize this is in St. George's, but my boat was blessed by the Anglican priest in St. George's. He goes out in a boat and he blesses your boat, and you give him a couple of bucks and you get a great certificate, which is sitting inside Sassafras. I'm very proud of it. Believe me, the trip I'm going to tell you, we were all looking at that, you know, in that picture. Okay, you know, the boat was blessed. Anyhow, so I got the boat to Lunenburg last June, and then we turned around immediately and we sailed it to Boston, and we did the Marblehead Halifax, from Boston to Halifax. It's a great race. I've done it, I think, 7 times on a friend's boat. This is the first time on Sassafras. This is a picture I had to put in because it's the worst sailing spinnaker takedown you've ever seen. It was photographed by a boat very close to us. We were 30 miles off the coast of Nova Scotia, at the very bottom of Nova Scotia at Brazil Rock. We were just approaching Brazil Rock, which is why we were dumping the spinnaker in the fog, which never lifted. That was us at the finish line of the Marblehead Halifax. And again, we finished without seeing shore. So that was where that took me to the middle of July, and then I returned the boat to Lunenburg, put it on a ball, and had a martini, and then having sailed in 12 months, slightly more than 10,000 nautical miles, and then flew home, and spent the summer without going to Sassafras at all. I returned to it in October and started to make all the preparations to return it to Bermuda, and that's where this story begins. Bermuda, I mean, I returned to the boat the second week of October, and we wanted to sail the boat October 28th to Bermuda. That was the date that our crew, I had 4 guys, including myself, we had decided. You can all hear me now, right? This is fine. We wanted to sail the boat October 28th. Why? Because if we left Lunenburg on October 28th, we'd arrive in Bermuda November 1st. And insurance for boats in the Caribbean kicks in on November 1st because of the hurricane season. If you sail a boat in the Caribbean, tell me to stop if you already know this, but if you sail a boat in the Caribbean from July 1st to November 1st, you can just forget about insurance if you get hit by a named storm, right? So most people, if they're going to the Caribbean, aim to get to Bermuda around November 1st. Because then you're insured for the remainder of your trip. So we were going to leave October 28th, except that, I forgot the slide, except for one problem, Hurricane Melissa. Hurricane Melissa this year started around the second week of October. I don't know if you all watched it, but it began very, very slowly the second week of October. And it just sat and it yarded up underneath Jamaica, and it sat there for a week without really doing anything. It was going like a mile an hour, and it wasn't much of a hurricane. And then all of a sudden, it got going and it turned into a Category 5 hurricane that hit Jamaica. And you know, if you follow the story, they had the highest wind speed ever recorded on the earth when that hurricane hit Jamaica, 256 miles an hour, and demolished Jamaica. But it kept going up. It went over Bermuda and out into the North Atlantic, and that started around October 24th. The big show for Hurricane Melissa started October 24th. We wanted to leave October 28th. We're not going anywhere, right? So my crew waited and waited and waited, all in Toronto, while I sat in the boat, working on the boat, doing all sorts of things, and until we finally had a weather window. that we thought we could deal with, right? And the weather window going to the Gulf Stream is, from Lunenburg, is a northwest wind. You want a northwest wind because your basic heading is around 180 degrees to Bermuda. 180 to 200 degrees, depending on where you're going to hit the Gulf Stream. And so we waited 2 weeks. And there were all sorts of boats yarded up in Lunenburg and Halifax waiting for that window. You need 3 days. You need 3 days to get across the Gulf Stream. And you really don't care about what happens after that, because you can't predict what's going to happen after 3 days anyways. But you need a 3-day weather window to get through the Gulf Stream. So around about November 10th, we had a 3-day prediction of a good weather window. I called the guys, they flew in. We had 24 hours in Lunenburg before we got in the boat on Thursday, November 13th, to leave for Bermuda. We were leaving with another boat, a 70-foot aluminum hull boat, brand new, had barely been sailed, Luminex, beautiful boat, and it had an owner, his wife, and 2 professional crew, one of whose name was Mike Moreland, a good friend of mine, and who does these trips repeatedly. I mean, he does them as a living, taking people across the Gulf Stream. So Thursday, November 13th, early in the morning, we're standing on the dock. Mike and I were looking at our forecasts, and this is what we're looking at. And at this point, I have to tell you just one thing. Predict wind and windy. I don't know how many of you all use Predict Wind and Windy. They don't have an archive. They don't archive their weather forecasts, period. You can't get them. If a week after you do a trip and you contact Predict Wind and say, can I just see what the forecast was? I can't remember what it was before I left. 0. They do not archive their data, or if they do, they don't share it with anybody, right? So I don't have this complete, I didn't think when I got back, that I was gonna be having a talk like this, or I would have taken a lot more screen grabs of this. So some of this is, I'm asking you to use your imagination, okay? Anyways, but this is for sure. Thursday, 6 o'clock in the morning, more or less, 8 o'clock in the morning, this is what the forecast was. And it was, you can see, where Nova Scotia is, you see that white dot up there, that's Sassafras. And so we had light wind coming out of the harbor, and then we were gonna sail into, 10 to 15, and then it was gonna get sporty. It was gonna go in 15 to 20, maybe 25 from the northwest. It was perfect. And we had a forecast that said 3 days of that. We knew we were gonna go fast, but the ocean was still churning because Melissa had done so much damage to the Atlantic. It was frothy, but it was a following sea, and it was fast, and we left. Our strategy was simple. Our strategy, I don't know if you know the Gulf Stream very well, but basically, if this is where we charted from Brazil Rock. I showed you that picture of us with our bad spinnaker takedown. That's at the very bottom of Nova Scotia. That's position number 1. And our strategy was to sail not 180 degrees. You can see from that point, number 1 to Hamilton was a straight line, 180 degrees. We didn't want to do that. Luminex, the boat we were with, they did that, but then they were a 70-foot boat with 2 engines, and they were using them both. So they could power through the Gulf Stream. We couldn't do that. I sailed at 2:05, and I wanted to hit this eddy here that would slingshot us into the Gulf Stream, that would deliver us across the Gulf Stream. We would actually arc. We wanted to hit the Gulf Stream about 30 miles above where we wanted to exit it. The Gulf Stream is 70 miles wide. When you're going across at 70 miles in these conditions, it'll take you 10 hours to get across that 70 miles, but the current is pushing you 3 miles to the east for every in those 10 hours. So it's 10 times 3, 30 miles. So we figured we'd arc through here, we get into the Gulf Stream here, we come out somewhere here, hook into this eddy, and that would take us this eddy here. We'd depart that eddy, and then we'd go straight to Hamilton. And by doing that, instead of going 8, 9 knots, we'd be going 11, 12 knots for the better part of 200 miles, which is why that was our strategy. And in actual fact, we executed it pretty well. Anybody have questions about that, or do you want to just keep talking? Okay. Our first day, Friday, we left Thursday. It was an easy sail. Friday, there's a sunset on Friday. It's a pretty easy sail. We had 25 knots following sea. We were going quick. Our first 24 hours, we did 200 miles. The sea was frothy, but it wasn't outrageous. It got tougher. Friday night, we're starting to approach that target I talked about, that first eddy. Okay, water temperature is starting to come up. Our boat speed is starting to accelerate a little bit. Where we are here, we're actually in a reverse current. It was very small reverse current. It took us another little bit before we got into that curve. So that's Friday night at about 7 p.m. At around 10 p.m., this is what we looked like. We were into that arc. We were coming actually out of the bottom end of it, heading to the Gulf Stream. You can see our heading was course over ground 209. Apparent wind was 128, so we were still going downwind with that northwest wind driving us. The wind had come a lot more to the north than we thought, so in actual fact, our true wind direction was 350. But because our boat speed, which was 11 knots, our speed over ground 10.7, we're going pretty fast. And the water temperature was 69 degrees. When we left Lunenburg, it was 51. Is that right, Bart?
Yep.
Yeah, 51 degrees. So it was 69. But we're not in the Gulf Stream yet. You know you're in the Gulf Stream because it goes from 69 to 83, 88 in a matter of about 5 miles. So we're still on the very edge of the Gulf Stream, and we're 40 miles west of the rum line. Like if we go back to here, the rum line, if the rum line is there, that grid, we're actually, at this point right there, we were actually about 75 miles from that rum line. When I showed you that picture, we were actually right about there, 40 miles from the rum line. The Luminex was right on the rum line. So they were 75 miles to our east. As we approached the Gulf Stream at around 10 o'clock, you can see the temperature starting to rise, boat speed starting to pick up. We're getting closer and closer. Of course, I'm online and I'm checking the forecasts. And this is what came in. We were, the top one is a wind. That's, forget the windy thing at the top. This is the forecast for wind, and at the bottom is the forecast for waves. And this was basically telling us that the forecast that we had left with was out the window, and that we were going to be sailing by Sunday morning, it's Friday night at midnight, So, you know, and we're on the edge of the Gulf Stream. We're gonna have to go through the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream, when we went through it, was 35 knots. When we got to the Gulf Stream, we were in 25 to 35 with 45 knot gusts from the northwest. And the following sea that was starting to really build. It was, you know, we were up to 2-3 meters. Most, you know, I don't know, 3-4.
Yep.
Yeah, let's call it 5.
Yep.
But you can see that all of a sudden, when we left, we had an inkling that we were gonna get wind coming in from the southwest. The predict wind model had it coming in from the southwest, but it was a day and a half behind this forecast. We figured we would be parked in Bermuda, having a rum Twizzler with plenty of time to spare before this front came in. Mike Moreland and I, on the morning of Thursday morning, professional sailor, we were looking at it and we were questioning, well, you know, what do you think about that? And I remember Mike saying, well, no, we'll be both in before that, and besides, even if it does catch us on the edge, it's not gonna be a bomb. Won't be a bomb, that's what he said. And it turned out to be a bomb. That's a bomb. That's 40, you know, we would be sailing across this, and in this section here, we would be in 45 to 50 knots. And this here is wave prediction, and we will be going through this section here. The waves in this section are 6 to 7 meters. So, and that just changed, just like that. So we're on the edge of the Gulf Stream, and decisions had to be made. And Mike and I were in constant conversation about all of this. So I just thought I'd just give you the text. You know, we started talking about making sure that we could see each other with our MIMSI numbers, and you know, that those were working. You know, Friday, 7 p.m. How are you guys doing? We're about 410 nautical miles from Bermuda. Means that they're, you know, about 50 miles from the Gulf Stream. You know, we're 40. Much tougher sailing than we had hoped. Nothing like forecast, 30 to 35 knots where we are. Yep, very fresh and not letting up. You know, professional sailor, fresh. And I wrote, so you're about 30 north of the stream. I think so, not in it yet. I'll let you know how it is. Please do. We're just to the east of the big eddy north of the stream. We're hoping to sail into that in about 4 hours. It'll help us out to the stream. That front coming from the south is going to be brutal. It was at 7 o'clock that we started to get the inkling. Anyhow, yep, it sped up from the forecast when we left. It's going to be a slog. That's at 7. At 10:20, they hit the Gulf Stream, and he wrote, letting you know, we decided to turn around and head back to Lunenburg. Forecast kept getting worse and worse. We never made it to the stream. It was already sloppy. Couldn't keep our speed up to get close enough to Bermuda before the big seas start. What a fucker. Sorry about the swearing. I know you're sailors and you're offended by it. Of course, should we do the same? I said, why not turn to Newport, 260 miles? We were 75 miles off west of the rum line, which meant we were 75 miles closer to Newport, and 260 miles. We could have made that pretty quickly. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. But Newport wasn't an option because the wind was coming from the southwest, and it was going to be 50 knots. And as we approached Newport, we would be approaching Newport as the leeward shore. And if anything happened, you don't want to be anywhere close to Newport. If you ever looked at a map of the shoals around Newport, they extend way out into the Cape. You don't want to be anywhere close to that in 55 knots with that on your leeward side. So he was like, Newport's out of the question. I had already came to that conclusion. Of course, you've ridden those storms before in your boat, I'm sure, but maybe this boat is brand new and the owner did not want to put it through 20-foot seas with his wife on board. We're 320 from Newport and 290 to Lunenburg, plus dead into the wind right now. We're motor sailing on a port tack, making decent speeds to the north. I figure we will have 100 miles on a reach with this gale building, 12 hours. Do you think the seas will build to that, to 20 feet? I'm seeing 20-foot seas all around Bermuda. So we're fucked getting in. Basically, if you go to Bermuda, there's one entrance into Bermuda. It's on the northeast side. It's surrounded by a reef. If you miss that entrance, you're on a reef. Kitchen Shoal is around the whole northern part of it. It has a lighthouse on it as big as the CN Tower. You can see it from 30 miles away. If you go into Bermuda, St. George's is a beautiful old church, and the church is filled with memorials to people who didn't get into Bermuda, right? Yeah. I'm not making this up. It's a beautiful visit if you ever want to go to the church in St. George's, the Anglican church. The walls are covered in people that didn't make it into Bermuda because it's a very dangerous place in 20-foot seas. And even though it was coming from the southwest, those waves would have wrapped around Bermuda. So if we manage to get through the storm and get to Bermuda, then that's when the real challenge would start, is trying to get into St. George's. So we turned around. Mike was like, well, the entrance will be in the lead, so you should be fine going in once you get there. Okay? And of course, I said no, and we turned around and started sailing home. I'm just going to take a minute now. Rob told me to try and inject into this a little bit of the lessons. But why did we turn around? We turned around not because of the wind. We turned around because of the waves. And why do you not want to be in a 20-foot wave in a 48-foot boat? Because once you're in over, if the wave you're encountering, your boat is 30%. Sorry, let me get this right. Sorry. If you're in a 30-foot boat and you have a 10-foot seat, that wave is 30% of your boat. And it starts to get dangerous. If you're in a 30-foot boat and you're in a 20-foot sea, a 15-foot sea, you're at 50%, okay? And the likelihood of you capsizing is at that point, very high. By the time it gets to 60%, every boat that gets hit by that wave, that percentage, that formula, is going to capsize. It's just the way it is. If you read the second line, during the model tests that we carried out to investigate the problem, when the breaking wave was 30% of the hull length, from trough to crest, it would capsize some yachts, while waves to a height of 60% of the hull length comfortably overwhelm all the boats we tested. Right? So you're sitting there right in the Gulf Stream, desperate to get to Bermuda and that rum Twizzler, and they're predicting a 20-foot wave, and you're 47 feet, right?
So this is what you were Googling?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I knew this already, but I did this map, and it's like, I'm at almost 50%, right? And then it gets more complicated, because that's just the normal waves, right? And you get about 14% of waves will be higher than the significant wave height. So that's 1 in every 7 waves. So if the normal wave is 7 meters, it means that you're going to get 23, 24 meter waves. And and it's normal to expect a wave twice the height of the significant wave about 3 times in 24 hours. So you're talking about rogue waves now, and you're done. Forget the wind. You can deal with the wind. It's the waves. And, you know, Mike, that's why they turned around. They didn't want to take a 70-foot boat into that and bash into it and potentially capsize a 70-foot boat, and we're in 47 feet. So we turned around, which was not fun, because by that point we were in pretty heavy following sea. We had 3-meter waves. We had gusts to 45, and we were going downwind, so we needed to jog. My first mistake, bad seamanship on my part. The rest of the guys said, well, we're gonna do a chicken jibe, right? We're gonna do a tack, 270-degree tack to get us around, to start going north. And of course, being the racer that I am, I said, no, we're jibing, why not? You know, like you just sheet in the main and, you know, turn the boat and then unsheet the main on the other side. Didn't work. We got halfway through the jibe. We were easing out the main. We got hit by a huge gust and a huge wave at the same time. The helmsman sort of lost, you know, it's very easy. This is pitch dark, 400 miles from shore. Lost concentration, you know, somebody stepped in front of the compass, I don't know, just for a second, boom, we were back on the other side, crash jibe. You know, big, you know, and we're lucky because I've got a deck sweeper. My boom, you know, Bart was on the deck. I still have nightmares about it because if it had hit Bart, it would have taken him to Newport. Right? The force was that great. Anyways, we turned the boat around, and the principal reason why we turned the boat around was the waves and then the wind. Where there was no way with this forecast there that we were going to get to Bermuda without being pounded. So we turned it around, crashed, but that's fine. We put it back together. We did damage some things, and then we started sailing back.
Hey, I know that guy.
We sailed back on the Saturday. Now we had jibed, and now we had a northwest wind. It was still coming in from the northwest. It was at 25 knots. And everything was, you know, it was actually quite pleasant all day Saturday. You know, because the forecast wind, the really bad stuff was in the southwest, and it hadn't come up to it yet, but it was going to. So we were racing back to Lunenburg as fast as we could to get as close to Lunenburg as we could before the big winds caught us. But I might just, let me just go back here. If you look at this forecast here, the later one, so we're in southwest winds and we're driving to Lunenburg. But the forecast had the northwest winds coming in at 30 to 40 knots, building. And they were gonna meet the southwest winds in just a conflagration, right? This is the perfect storm conditions now, right? I started to get texts from people in Halifax, like sailors in Halifax saying, where are you? You know, at one point I got a text from a friend saying somebody's EPIRB went off. Is that yours? Well, that was the boat that was sinking, right? Because they decided not to turn around and went right into it and sunk. Another boat also chose to go in, and they did make it to Bermuda. They made the news in Bermuda because they came in just a wreck. They had no motor, they had no electricity. The storm just wiped everything out. So I'm very happy. But we were racing north, trying to get away from this southwest wind, but we were sailing into a heavier sea from the northwest. And you know, you can see us. This is on. We're on starboard jibe now. So as you know, we had to jibe when we turned around, and we were sailing with the northwest wind for close reach, and then eventually that southeast wind caught us, and we had to jibe on that. And I was at the helm this time, and I hadn't learned the lesson from the first time, so we did another jibe, and muffed that way. And this time, this is Tracy, that's Bart. This time, the Traveler just completely came apart. So this is on the second muffed jibe. The Traveler just broke. And so now we're piecing together, we're sailing. You can see there's a double reef main, the head sail. You know, I didn't even want to put a number 3 up, and we have a staysail. I didn't want anybody on the deck to put the staysail up because we had breaking waves. So we just furled in the number 1 to a rag, and just didn't want anybody on the deck because it was pretty wild. But you know, that's what happened to the Traveler on the second muffed jibe. I will never do this again. You know, I'll live with the chicken part of the chicken jibe and do the 270-degree tack going forward. We did have some pleasant run on the way to Lunenburg. We had dolphins, but eventually we started to approach Lunenburg, and it got pretty crazy as we approached Lunenburg because that northwest wind came in, and it was 45 knots. It wasn't 25 knots, it was 45 knots. But the seas, because it was coming from the northwest, the seas weren't so bad. They were only 2 to 3 meters rather than the big swells. By that point, we had big swells from behind. But it was cold, you know, because it came in from the northwest. So the temperature, you know, you saw the 69-degree water, and when we turned around, the water came back down to 51, and the temperature, which when we turned around was like 15 degrees, was 2 degrees. So we were 2 degrees before the wind chill, in soaking wet, breaking waves in 45 knots. You know, Bart and Tracy did most of the driving, and it was very tough driving. But we managed to get in. It was not easy. Coming into the harbor was especially hard because we came in basically at that point. It was a full-on storm, 45 knots, and Lunenburg is surrounded by reefs. So you know, I drove for the last 25 miles to get through all the reefs and all the lights, because the lights can be very confusing because there are so many channels. And we finally got to the dock and parked the boat. I mean, it was blowing 25 knots inside Lunenburg Harbor. At the end of the harbor, you know, forget the 45 at the front of it. Anyways, and we survived. We packed up our things in the morning and we all went home. And here's the story. A couple things, other things that happened that I want to talk about. It's 8:13, so I've been talking for 45 minutes now. So just a few other things. Sometime you should watch this video. Why bilge pumps always fail. Because the other reason we turned around is because on the drive down to the Gulf Stream, we had a following sea and it started to really build. And late in the day, as we approached the Gulf Stream on the Friday, Kevin, my old friend Kevin, he came up on deck and said, "Michael, there's water coming up through the floorboards. What's that all about?" And I was like, "Oh, well, we're on a heel. It's probably just a bit of water." And then I thought, maybe I should check that. And I went down below and lifted up a floorboard, and the water was 1 inch below the terminals of our batteries. 1 inch. It was, the bilge had been completely filled, right? I reached down into the bilge, put my hand on the pump, the bilge pump. It was hot, but not working. Checked the fuse had melted. The boat, for whatever reason, and I know what the reason was, the bilge just failed. And the bilge failed. It failed because I had been working on the boat with an electrician. We installed a new charging system from the motor to the batteries, like a 250 amp alternators in the boat to charge the batteries. And I had tried to vacuum everything up. I thought I'd vacuumed everything up because there was sawdust and all sorts of bits. They got into the bilge and they seized that bilge pump. And, so where did the water come from? Well, the water, as we discovered, Bart, he was very calm about this. I was freaking out. Bart was very calm. I wasn't freaking out. Yeah, no, I was. It's my boat. We went to the hand pumps. There were two in the boat, big guzzlers. We started pumping the water out. And of course they failed after a while. Because they do, for the same reason that the main bilge failed, is that there was some crap in the water and they, the guzzlers have two valves, one at intake and one out, and they failed. So we're in a pretty frothy sea, we're going pretty fast. I'm down below, taking apart pumps, trying to clear out the crap. I couldn't do anything with the bilge pump, because it's too deep in the well for me to reach. But we got them working again. We got most of the water out. Water was still coming in. Those bilge pumps stopped working completely. They just cacked the valves. And so in the end, to solve the problem, and I'll get to the bigger problem in a minute, I had to go into a shower well, a shower sump, there was a tiny little bilge pump in our sump for our showers that pumps water out of the showers. And I had to pull that out and rewire it, drop it into the bilge, and we were able to get the water out of the bilge. And so when we approached the Gulf Stream, we had a very defective bilge system. Like, it was working, but this was not Bristol. And so other than the waves and the wind and everything else, there's no way I was going forward because we didn't have a proper bilge system. The reason the water was coming in at first, I thought, was waves, because we had breaking waves, tons of them. And they were, the Swan is a beautiful boat, but it's also a 50-year-old boat. So it's fairly porous in parts, so you have water coming in through the front hatch, you have water coming all sorts of places. And I thought at first that the water was just coming from the breaking waves. It wasn't. The water was coming in because there was a following sea, and the valves were defective on the two hand pumps, and so the water was able to come up through the hose, through those pumps, hand pumps, and into the bilge. We were sucking water from the stern into the bilge, and so it took me quite a while to figure that one out. And so the boat came very close to us having a real problem, 1 inch away from losing the batteries. That's how boats sink. That's how boats sink. You lose your bilge, and you think your bilge is working great. You think the whole system is working great until suddenly it's not. And it might have been busted. It was probably busted for a while, and I never ever noticed it. But so your recommendation, you should watch this video. It's a really good one, because what I just told you is what he says. Right? You should be. And I'm going next week back to the boat to get started on our plans for the spring. And I'm working on this whole thing. We're rebuilding our bilge system. We're going to put so many bilges in the boat, bilge pumps in the boat, back up. I'm going to go to Canadian Tire and get a 120-volt sump pump just on a hose to back up the whole thing, because it was terrifying. That's the first sort of side lesson, that maybe the story is a little more complicated than it should be. The second thing that happened on the boat, and was, as I said, it was very cold. It was very cold. The water was breaking over us. It was 51 degrees. We were 2 degrees on the deck. The boat, down below it's quite comfortable, but there's no heating system. There's no central furnace. So there's really, once you get cold, there's very little opportunity to warm up. So we had 4 guys on the boat, including myself, And one of our guys, Kevin, old friend, he developed hyperthermia. Halfway through Sunday, I'm talking to him, and his hands were shaking. And a little while later, he was sitting down below, and his knees were shaking, and and you took a look, and you realized his skin, he was definitely working through the first stage of hypothermia. There are typically 3 stages of hyperthermia. To be perfectly honest, to make this brief, I didn't show you the other 2. You'll look them up. It gets really serious at that point, right? Especially in people our age. Organs start to malfunction as you get colder and colder. And so Kevin, who, is just wanted to go up and jog. He was like, no, Kevin, you're in a bunk under every blanket we've got, and you're staying there. You're not going up on deck. And he's like, no, I can drive. He's like, no, Kevin. And if you read this is interesting. The last person that should be assessing a hyperthermic patient is the patient, right? Because at that point, they're just, their judgment is impaired. So, we had to put Kevin down. He was very angry at me.
Can I rephrase that?
Pardon me?
Kevin's no longer with us. We had to put him down.
What's that?
We had to put him down.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no.
He's still with us. Kevin's still good.
I literally had to force him to lie down. Not physically, but he did not want to. I wanted to go on deck and drive. He was like, "No, you're not driving." When we got to Lunenburg, I had a friend I called Dirk Segenga. I don't know if anybody of you know him from Macintosh, who's in Halifax now. And he met us at the dock at 2:30 in the morning and took Kevin away. They had a discussion between themselves on whether he should go to the Emerge or just go to Dirk's house and climb into a warm bath and a warm bed. And it took Kevin till the next day in the afternoon to stop shaking. And so I don't have a regret of it. He was angry at me for a bit, but you know what? I'll live with it. It's what called being a skipper is. You got to make those calls. So that's one of the lessons from this trip, is that we discovered things about the boat, and I sailed thousands of miles. And maybe my build system had been busted the whole time and I didn't know it. Although I've been, and certainly you have to always be aware, especially in the cold, of things like hyperthermia, because it can get serious really fast. We had breakage. This is us the next day. I put the Dolphin in just to make it more interesting, but you'll notice that we're missing our boom. We took our boom off because in the 2 muff jibes, there are 32 stainless steel 3/8 bolts, 3/8-inch bolts that hold the whole boom together, the extrusion attached to the inner pieces. 32 stainless steel bolts, 20 of them had popped their heads. Like just popped off, from the jolt, the force from our 2 muff jobs, probably mine. So we had, I'm having it remachined, and I've got a guy in Halifax working on that. And then these guys flew home. I took the boat to Mahone Bay, the East River, and parked it and had it hauled out, and that's where it is, and I'll be going to it next week. And that's essentially the end of my story. That's the end of the story. I hope it was a good story for you, but there it is. Thanks very much. Questions? Or is that enough?
I got a question. When there is a crisis like that, I understand one of the biggest problems the captain has is the crew behavior. And I wonder, even though some of them are here, did you have any problems of disagreement with the crew? And
No,
lack of cooperation?
we're,
You did vote one of them down.
One of the one of the better people down, so
yeah.
it's got a pirate life.
The beatings will continue until morale improves. No, honestly, these guys are, no, not at all, not once. Even when, when the water, I don't know anybody else, the water,
Oh, sorry.
pardon me, no, this is a home crew, we've sailed thousands of miles together. And so nobody was, and everybody stepped up. Bart and Tracy, they drove the last 100 miles to Lunenburg was with a following sea and a 45-knot wind ahead of us, right? So we were in a confused sea, 2 degrees, and freezing with breaking waves. We actually, we had a line from, at that point when we were coming in, we were sailing 11 knots, we were surfing at 16, 17, which you don't want to do, right? We lost a line in the water at midnight. And of course, I was the one who went up and, reached out. I had to, go right to the very bow and reach out to get this line because we couldn't start our motor with it in the water. And at that point, we wanted to start our motor. And I'm like, oh my God. Of course I had like 6 tethers on, but that's not gonna help you, with the bow of the boat. But no, these guys were rock solid. There was no panic. And Kevin did what he was supposed to do. And I think everybody did what they were supposed to do. Which is, we're just, sorry.
How long did it take you to provision the boat for that trip? And was it one person or all of you did?
No, it's just me. I provisioned it. It was just a trip to Costco, a couple of trips to the local grocery store. The guys flew in the night before we left. We went out for beers and we were on the dock ready to go in first thing in the morning. That guy had been there for 3 weeks, so I had plenty of time to provision the boat.
We bought more rum.
Yeah, brought rum, didn't drink it. The boat is dry. Don't let me, when we sail, the boat is dry, completely. Yes?
What would you do differently regarding planning and weather? In hindsight, do you think you waited too late to turn around?
No, I turned around as soon as I knew. I had no idea, we turned around virtually at the same time as the 70-footer, and both of, the way the skeds come in, they only come in twice a day. So, you're working in the morning with the morning forecast, waiting for the next forecast in the evening. So we turned around, pretty much after we got that second forecast. So I don't regret that. The only regret I have is, if we had waited 3 days, Luminex, they got into harbor, they had to fix some things. They had a broken wine rack.
The poor dough is gone.
I'm not making that up. They were lovely people, but they had a whole bunch of breakage on the boat. But as soon as that front passed, there was a high pressure, and they sailed right away. So they came in Monday night. Sunday night. We were in early Monday morning. They were back out to sea Thursday. And my only regret is that if we had just delayed our trip, if we had said, well, we are rolling the dice in that southwestern front moving forward. But, that's, hindsight is, the retrospectoscope is always perfect. Yes?
Those boats that didn't make it, where were they when you turned around?
They were 75 miles to the east of us. They were on the Rhone line, and I don't know very many of the particulars. I tried for this conversation to reach out to them, but I just haven't been able to find out anything more other than that you know, when I got back, everyone in Halifax and Lunenburg were talking about it, that the boat went down. But they were, you know, we had sailed 75 miles to the west of the run line to hook into the better current, right? Which is a product of my racing as opposed to my cruising. You know, I mean, maybe we should have stayed in the run line like everyone else, but if I were racing in this boat, the tactic I used would be, I'd do it again. But they sunk past the Gulf Stream on their way to Bermuda. But I don't know how close they were to Bermuda.
Did emergency services get to them? Did they survive?
They used, their EPIRB went off and they got picked up by a freighter. So they lost their boat, they were in a life raft, 4-man, and got picked up by a freighter and got a free trip to Croatia. But all hands on deck. I mean, nobody, as far as I know, was injured. But I called all sorts of people to try to get more info on them. They didn't make it to the Bermuda news, so they were obviously farther away from Bermuda, far enough away that Bermuda didn't include them in their marine reports.
Your insights on the waves was very interesting, obviously with currents and shifting winds and everything. Anything else to add to the wind story, or the wave story, because that was very interesting in terms of the build-up.
We're going to cross the Atlantic this summer. We're going to take the boat. We're doing the Newport Bermuda this year again, so I'm going to go across the Gulf Stream one more time. Look out. And then we're going to take it from Bermuda to the Azores. And I'm going to get a drogue. I'm going to pay the, you know, I think it's like $4,000 to have a custom drogue made. Because certainly in those conditions, a drogue would have helped quite a bit. Keeping your stern, you know, so that you're not rolling. You know, I mean, a broadside on a wave is certain capsize. So if you can keep your bow or your stern into that wave, you stand a better chance, especially with a breaking wave. And that's what drogues do. So before we cross the Atlantic this summer, June, July, I'll have a drogue on board. That's, you know, and just try and avoid it. Although you can't. Right? You know, if you can't avoid risk. If you wanted to avoid 100% of risk, you wouldn't sail. So.
But, Michael, it's a good point. I love the way you articulated waves over wind. Like when you think about routing, most people focus on wind and wind speed and where the rate's going to be, but it's the waves that are the issue. So think about waves when you are doing your routing, because that's where you get into trouble, especially through the Gulf Stream, where you get wind going against the Gulf.
Shorten your sails.
That's where you get in trouble.
You can accommodate the wind. You know, double reef, triple reef, storm sail that's a head sail, no sail. Right? You can deal with the wind, but there's nothing you can do to make that wave smaller.
Get a big square top wave, it's gonna
Yeah.
take you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just curious, on the way back, have you considered, I'm not a sailor, but have you considered pulling in to the East Coast instead of returning?
It gets really messy on the southwest corner of Nova Scotia. We looked at Yarmouth, but you know, in actual fact, it was no better in terms of distance from where we were to go to. It would save us a couple of miles, and we would have been coming in at 2 a.m. to a harbor that I'm not comfortable with. I have never come into. You know, I knew how to get us into Bermuda. So I did look at it. It's this, but also it's that leeward. You know, we have following sea, so it's a leeward shore, and you just start to get very cautious. So Lunenburg was my best bet.
You're basically out there for a couple of days sail, so when you came back to Lunenburg, did you check in with customs?
No, actually we didn't, because we never left. We never stepped. We laughed about it when we got back because we didn't step on any other shore, right? So we didn't have to report. You don't
No,
have to
I was
report.
just curious.
Yeah, does that work?
You don't have to report when you depart Canada, but you do have to report to Canada if you go to a foreign country. But we actually never stepped, we left Lunenburg Dock and we came back to Lunenburg Dock. So we didn't have to call them at all. Yeah. Anything else?
What kind of systems did you have on board and procedures in place for the worst case scenario? If you capsized, did you have self-inflated rafts?
Yeah, no.
What did you discuss prior to leaving about this?
Well, that's, we raced this boat in offshore races. Newport, Bermuda, Caribbean 600, all of the races I've described. And so the boat is safety up to right to the teeth. Like we have an auto inflate life raft on deck. We have 2 e-perks. We have a sat phone. We have ditch bags. Even though we've sailed the same boat for thousands of miles together, we go through the routine, the checklist before we leave every time. I mean, this is where the e-perks are. This is where the first aid kit is. This is where the big first aid kit is. We have all of that stuff. You have to do these races. And because of the 2 boats that sank in the Newport in 2024, they're making it even more extreme. There's all sorts of extra things we have to do now for Newport, Bermuda. Keel bolts have to be checked. We have to 3,000 gallon an hour bilge pump, although I'm gonna end up with about 12.
I second that motion.
Yeah.
But, I know we go through that regardless of, isn't that, Bart, regardless of how many people have heard the spiel before, we go through it every time. It's like a flight check in a plane.
Yep.
And, in terms of capsizing, again, that's a prerequisite of Newport, Bermuda. All these races is that everything has to be bolted down. Anything that can move in a capsize has to be bolted. So things like this, your stove has to be bolted. Your floorboards have to, be able to remain in place on a capsize. We covered all of that. Yes, sir.
When you actually turned around, did you actually do any preparation just in case you capsized?
No. No, we didn't, because in that situation, when we turned around, we weren't anywhere. I mean, it's why hubris decided to do a jive and not a chicken jive, because, we had 3 meter waves, but we're not going over 3 meter waves. It's the same deal in Lake Ontario. It's almost impossible in Lake Ontario unless you get caught in a November gale down by Duck Island, Main Duck. Lake Ontario just doesn't see 10-foot waves. They're very rare. And forget a 15-foot wave, right? So it's virtually, you just don't think about capsizing in Lake Ontario unless you're, really working. But I didn't think about that at all. So, my bad. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Good job, Michael.
Thanks very much, Michael. That was fascinating. Of course, I guess if you're sailing to an island with a church for people who didn't make it to the island, you kind of take a message from that.